Honestly, for a slave to pursue a court case against a white man at that time, that was basically unthinkable.
Step back in time to a period when Indiana wasn't as free as some might think it was. While this area was being settled, many black slaves were brought and kept here. But thanks to a few brave individuals, the fight to set new historical and legal precedents for our state began right here in our community.
Indiana originally was controlled by the French. And the French, they were okay with slavery at that time, back in the 1700s.
Then came the Northwest Ordinance, signed into law in 1787. This ordinance created the division of the Northwest Territory, also creating a Bill of Rights. That Bill of Rights included a protection of religious freedom, provided the right to a writ of habeas corpus, which is the right to challenge a person's detention, and it provided for the benefit of trial by jury. The Bill of Rights also encouraged public education, but most of all, it forbade slavery. But as retired Vincennes University professor Janelle Owens explains, freedom for slaves still wasn't how it appeared on paper.
They had a trap door built in. So you could not make somebody a slave then. If you were born a slave before 1787, you were still a slave. And then if someone who was still considered to be a slave had a child, even though that child would be born maybe in 1790, whenever, if the parent was a slave, the child was a slave, even though slavery was prohibited.
And that's where the first case involving Polly Strong took one of the first legal swings at this ongoing injustice. Polly Strong was born into slavery in 1796 in the Northwest Territory. In 1806, Vincennes innkeeper Hyacinth LaSalle purchased Strong and brought her to Knox County. And again, even though the 1816 Indiana State Constitution prohibited slavery and involuntary servitude, Strong and many like her were not actually considered free.
Well, now you're not a slave. What are you? You're threatened, is what you are, because if you don't sign those lovely indenture papers that they say you willingly signed, there was no forced indenture. So we couldn't force you into an indenture. Well, what do you call it when you're told that if you don't sign these papers that you can't read, if you don't sign and make your little mark, they're going to take you down south and sell you.
It was Strong's mother and Knox County Attorney Moses Tabbs who helped her take her case to the Knox Circuit Court, but they lost. That's when New York lawyer Amory Kinney stepped in to join the fight.
First of all, he heard about the case and he was appalled to find out that slavery did exist, even in a prettified form in Indiana. So he comes in from New York to take on the case. He takes the case, it's tried, loses again, takes it to the Indiana Supreme Court. Now, the LaSalle family, who had had slaves for generations, they said that she willingly signed the indenture a month before the court case. So his lawyer presents this indenture paper. Oh no, they said they want to be indentured. He said that no, they did not willingly sign that. You only had it signed a month ago, and they were sitting in jail at the time. So I don't think that's considered willing if you're in jail and you're forced to sign that. So the case goes to the Indiana Supreme Court. Amory Kinney presents his case, and Polly Strong won her freedom.
It was July 22, 1820, when the Indiana Supreme Court ruled in Strong's case that slavery can have no existence in Indiana. And while it did not free the remaining slaves in our state, it did establish the Indiana Constitution as the authority for Indiana court rulings in cases involving slavery and involuntary servitude. including another historical Knox County case involving Mary Bateman Clark. Clark was born a slave in Kentucky. She was brought to Indiana by Benjamin Harrison in 1814. While she was technically freed after the 1816 Constitution, she was immediately sold into indentured servitude.
In 1816, he sold her for $350 to a relative named General Johnston. $350 in 1816 is almost $6,500 today.
General Washington Johnston actually served as the presiding judge of the Knox County Circuit Court from December 1818 to April 1819, when previous habeas corpus suits involving slaves or indentured servants were filed, only to be continued to the next term, most of which were never heard. Harrison and Johnston claimed that Clark was freed by Harrison before willingly becoming an indentured servant for Johnston. Attorney Amory Kinney took residence in Knox County following Polly Strong's case, and it was Kinney who filed Clark's habeas corpus petition in Knox Circuit Court to fight for her freedom in 1821.
County court, she lost. Not only did she lose, the court said that she had to pay Johnston's court fees. Amory Kinney, he pushes for this. Again, it goes to the Supreme Court. They win.
On November 6, 1821, the Indiana Supreme Court ruled that while the state constitution allowed for voluntary indentures, Clark's application to the circuit court to be discharged from Johnston's custody established that she was no longer willing to serve and was to be emancipated.
Both of their cases, Polly Strong and Mary Bateman Clark's, both of those set precedents, and amazingly the number of slaves and indentured servants in the state of Indiana went down dramatically. Not because their owners were going, oh, I shouldn't be doing that. It's not moral to own a slave. They left the state. They moved down south. But there were some who did emancipate their slaves.
Kinney went on to file many other freedom suits on behalf of other slaves seeking freedom from servitude. He stayed in Vincennes until 1823 before moving to Washington, Indiana, and then to Terre Haute in 1826.
Amory Kinney ended up moving. He had so many threats against his life that he left the area. And if they were going to threaten a white man, prominent, he was a lawyer, well-to-do. If they were going to threaten him with acts of violence, what would they do to a woman who had been a slave? A woman who really had no financial backing, nothing standing behind her to support her. If she had disappeared in the middle of the night, they wouldn't have had any general outcry.
Clark did stay in Vincennes after her emancipation, raising a family with her husband Samuel. She passed away at the age of 39 in 1840, which was also the last year that the U.S. Census recorded any slaves in Indiana. Travel just south to Gibson County, and we find another historical legal case which helped bridge the gap for the African American community trying to grow in Indiana. Located within Patoka Township near the Patoka River, the community of Lyles Station dates back to the late 1830s, founded by a freed slave, Joshua Lyles, who migrated here from Tennessee. This settlement was one of the earliest black rural settlements in the state. Just across the Patoka River was another settlement founded by James Roundtree, which included around 9 families who would take their crops to the Lyles Station mill. But as historian Stanley Madison explains, by the time the 1880s rolled around, the bridge which made that short trip possible had faced repeated destruction.
Well, at that time, Mr. Roundtree had established a settlement over here with the group of people that was trying to be able to link back to the African American settlement across the Patoka River. And the bridge was built by wood one time, and it was destroyed by the flood. The current of water going through Patoka River took the bridge out. Then he builds it back again, and the lightning hit it and burns it down to the riverbanks.
Without the bridge, the journey to Lyles Station would take most of a day. So after the last round of destruction of the wooden bridge, Roundtree approached the Gibson County Commissioners, asking for their support in building a metal bridge, which would withstand the elements of nature. They denied his request. So Roundtree sued the commissioners in county court, which he lost. But he didn't let that deter him and kept appealing his case to the higher courts.
So Mr. Roundtree was one of those individuals that didn't take no for an answer, and he had to be challenged with making that happen with that bridge. It was one of those things that I imagine in discussions down here at the local general store, they probably said, "Jimmy, I don't see how you're going to be able to convince these people to put that bridge across there, because you've already lost your case to county, you've already lost a case at state. How do you think you're going to be able to go to the Supreme Court and appeal this and win that case?" And he said, "I believe in my faith that we will be able to win this case." So he paid that lawyer to follow on through to, at that time, the Supreme Court was a traveling court. It wasn't just in one location. So went to Indianapolis, and I'm sure it took time out and money for him to travel that long distance. But at the Supreme Court, he was able to win the case for the Black Bridge to be built. That was a big, you might say, important encouragement for a lot of us as African Americans, because we challenged the law of Indiana and we won that case. And so we felt like that if we could win a case like that, maybe we could win a case of something more important, like be able to vote. Maybe we could have another case that we could maybe win and have a voice on the courtroom. All of this stemmed from this bridge being won to encourage more individuals to step forward and petition, or you might say voice their opinion.
How important is it for people today to know these stories?
They definitely need to know them. First of all, they need to know the hardships that their ancestors faced. They need to know that changes took place because of brave individuals who stood up and said, "This is wrong." They need to know that just because your family has money, which was the case with the LaSalle family, the Harrison family, they need to know that you can fight them and win. Just because they have money, it doesn't mean that they're right.